Okay, I would like to take a moment to introduce the content of our policy paper, Rethinking Canada's Auto Industry, a policy vision to escape the race to the bottom. It's not just about CAW members, it's about the whole community, the whole province, the whole country. And the central theme of our initiative here is to show that we all depend on the auto industry and the good jobs that are provided in the auto industry and other high-value, high-wage, highly productive, export-oriented industries like the auto industry. The auto industry is not just our priority, and it's not just Windsor's priority. It should be a national priority, economically and socially, and that's why we need a national auto policy. And that is the goal of our initiative with these 8 town hall meetings, the policy paper, and the other materials that are there. 112,000 people work directly in auto manufacturing, parts, and assembly. The studies show every job in a major auto facility run by one of the OEMs, like the Chrysler and the Ford plants here, support 10 jobs in total. Work that through, the multiplier effect is 375,000 jobs in Canada that depend on auto being here. $16 billion in value added for the industry, productivity at $142 per hour. That's 4 times the average productivity in our private sector in Canada. So having a foothold in an industry like auto that exports 85 or 90% of its output is immediately an advantage in international trade. Auto is the most traded product in the world economy. So the fact is, if you're not in auto, you're going to have trade problems. The direct incomes of auto workers, of course, $6 billion a year, $2 billion plus that go in taxes back to support our public programs, a unique intensity of innovation, of technology, of research that, again, are crucial. We have survived the meltdown, and this is important. I don't want to underestimate the pain that's been experienced in this community and every other auto community because of what's happened in the last few years. But we did survive. We are still here, our community is still here, our industry is still here, and our union is still here. But I think we are at a point where we have to ask ourselves as a country, what are we going to do to preserve this industry for the future? We can't take the industry for granted. We have to be there all the time with measures aimed at reinforcing the industry's footprint in Canada, at winning the next generation of investments. Otherwise, we will keep shrinking. And the way to do that is not to join the race to the bottom. And so part of our policy exercise has to be to look around the world, ask ourselves who has succeeded and why have they succeeded, and talk about the best practices in auto policy that we can emulate in Canada to keep our jobs for the next generation. We have to confront some of the myths that are out there that are repeated ad nauseum by the commentators and the anti-union people and the business lobbyists and some of the conservatives. The first myth, of course, is that our wages are too high, and that's why our industry is in trouble. Here's the reality. In fact, in real economic terms, Canada has a labor cost advantage relative to the United States and other developed countries like Germany and Japan. In Canada, on average, international studies have shown something that costs $100 in America, the bundle of goods and services that are produced, costs $123 in Canada. So on average, consumer prices are $23 more expensive in Canada than they are in the United States. So take the 23% premium that we pay on consumer prices and deflate our wage by it, Top production wage in a CAW plan is $34. Top production wage in a UAW plan is $28. CAW members make $6 an hour more, but the reality is we pay 23% more for everything we buy. Take $34 and divide it by a 23% price premium. You'll see that our wage is actually slightly lower than in the US, and our all-in labor costs, remember our wage is high, but we've got other things that we save money on. Our healthcare costs, for example, our payroll taxes are lower. We don't have the same bonus structure as they do in America. Put it all together, our all-in labor costs are several dollars an hour lower than they are in the US, and they're lower than in Germany and Japan. So this nonsense that auto workers in Canada are fat cats, that we're out of touch, that we're living high off the hog, is absolute nonsense. The problem for us is we have a real labor cost advantage, but we have a distortion that's caused by the value of the Canadian dollar. And this is a roller coaster graph that shows the value of the Canadian dollar in US cents over the last 30 years or so. And it's up and down and up and down, and right now it's way, way up, at par with the United States. Now, the two lines that are in the middle are important. The green line is a line that's called the purchasing power parity value. $1 in Canada can buy as much real stuff as 81 cents in the US because our prices are 23% higher. That's what that means. We have to understand what the dollar does to us and why it's there. It's a petrocurrency now, and that is the root of our problem. This is why we are not more expensive than other countries, but we seem to be more expensive than other countries. Our real production costs and our real wages are not higher, they're actually lower. But with the dollar where it is, they look higher, and it's because the financial traders who determine our exchange rate have decided the oil price is the main variable. And you can look statistically over the last decade or so, the ups and downs of the oil price explain 86% statistically of the ups and downs of the dollar, and that's why we're in this mess. 25% above purchasing power parity, which means everything we produce for a world market looks 25% too expensive. This is equivalent to an enormous cost penalty being imposed on any of our export industries. In the auto industry's case, paying 25% more in international terms for everything that we add value to is equivalent to a $3.7 billion annual penalty. And that's why taking measures to control the currency and manage the currency are essential to the future of our industry, like other countries have done, by the way, such as Japan, such as China, such as Brazil. Those are all countries where the government and its financial agencies have intervened directly to either control the exchange rate or to influence the exchange rate. Despite the pain that's been experienced in the last few years, our share of the North American auto industry actually grew a little bit. This is a graph that shows Canada's share of the total North American auto market, again, over the last 20-some years. The blue line shows vehicles assembled in Canada as a share of all the vehicles produced in North America. And you see that our share has been quite steady in the 16 to 17% range, even right through the crisis. The red line is actually a more accurate measure of our market share. This is the share of Canadian vehicles assembled relative to all the vehicles bought in North America. Not all the vehicles produced in North America, but all the vehicles bought here. The difference between the two lines is the imports that come to North America from offshore. So we actually picked up a couple points of market share during the crisis. This graph shows the jobs trend in Canada and the US for the auto industry, assembly and parts. This measures the production shop floor workforce in the two countries, and obviously it was a disaster on both sides of the border. But the reality is, since 2006, when the subprime crisis hit, the decline in US auto employment was slightly worse than in Canada, and the rebound in Canada has been slightly stronger. So the idea that you can win the race to the bottom by destroying middle-class jobs, which is what right-to-work laws do, and which is what two-tier wages would do, okay, that idea is absolutely false. The final myth, again, just to look at, is this idea that we're completely uncompetitive as a manufacturing jurisdiction. 99% of the discussion of the auto industry in the newspapers tends to be about auto worker wages, right? The reality is direct labor costs in the auto producers are only 5%. What about the other 95% of the picture? And this is where Canada, again, has got some good advantages going for us. Our productivity record is better. On average, the average hour of work produces 5 to 10% more value added in Canada than in the US. We've got an unbeatable quality and launch record. Our healthcare system saves us $6 to $7 an hour on labor costs for the active workers. The companies pay one third less on corporate taxes here than they do in America. So there's lots of reasons to look strongly at Canada, but it won't happen if we don't have an all-round auto policy to nail it as we go forward. What we need is a global economy that's two-way trade, that's mutually beneficial, where you have the power as a country to manage that trade so that it's in your interest. And we absolutely reject the claim that we heard in the Caterpillar dispute and everywhere else. We live in a global economy. There's nothing you can do except cut your wages in half. That's absolute nonsense. Absolute nonsense. Our governments have the power and the responsibility to protect Canadian living standards, not to allow Canadian middle-class jobs to disappear. And it's time they lived up to that responsibility. So that's kind of the context by where we come to our own auto policy vision, an alternative way to support our industry into the future without joining a race to the bottom that we can't win. We believe that Canada, like other successful high-income auto-producing jurisdictions, can have a viable, dynamic, profitable auto industry. We have to rethink the assumptions of economic policy, rethink the idea that all you have to do is cut taxes and open yourself for business, and the corporations of the world will beat a path to your door. That hasn't worked, and it won't work. So this is where we get our 10-point auto strategy that's described in full in the book. The policies that we have, number one, we need an integrated strategy that uses the federal and provincial governments, that addresses assembly and parts, that lines up our ducks in order to make sure we have the maximum chance for investment. Number two, negotiate Canadian manufacturing footprint agreements with the major automakers. The Harper government did exactly that this year when they announced the shipbuilding policy. There's a Canadian manufacturing footprint provision in the shipbuilding policy which says every dollar value added in this contract has to be matched directly or indirectly by a dollar of value added in the Canadian economy. A consistent and transparent auto investment program. Instead of playing this kind of cat and mouse game like we do today, whether the government's going to participate in investments or not. Keep a public minority equity share in the original equipment makers. Countries around the world have invested in their auto companies. Volkswagen is 20% owned by the German state of Lower Saxony, for example. Maybe we should own a chunk of our automakers as well as a way of keeping them in Canada. Maybe we should build a Canadian auto company, okay? It'll take some time to do it. We'll have to use some joint ventures and other techniques, but that's how Korea and Japan and other countries built domestic automakers. We have to rethink our trade policy. We have to intervene to reduce the Canadian dollar. People say there's nothing you can do about the dollar. That is absolutely empirically false. The Bank of Canada has the power to intervene to pull down the dollar. They acknowledge that they have the power to intervene. They have just said they don't want to. A green auto industry, number 8, is an essential part of it. We have to have an industry that's advanced in terms of environmental impacts, the sustainability of our products and our processes. Buy Canadian vehicle procurement. Investing in human and physical infrastructure, that means the skills, the capacity, the transportation networks, the plants that we need going into the future. Every one of these policies has been implemented successfully somewhere in the world. So I thank you very much for your patience as we went through that. It's very important to have some facts and figures to counter the myths that are out there. And by educating ourselves and our community, I believe we can win the fight for a new generation of good jobs in this community. Thank you very, very much.